managing money, so I don't want infinite money, first of all. Because that will take my sleep away. I want to have peaceful night. But coming back to, I heard a lot of people talk about traveling. I am a very weird traveling knack. So I love to explore cities. So when I came to Bangalore, what I used to do, I used to buy those BMTC buses and roam around places which I don't know, right? That time back then, 2005-06, there was no Google map. So I couldn't even check on my phone like where I'm going. But I got into a bus and make sure that I got back the same bus, so that I come back to the place like Majestic, which was kind of central area for me, where I can go from anywhere, right there. So I have done that in many cities, in fact, across the globe wherever I got a chance. For example, I used to report to Microsoft Netherlands back in then. I used to buy a 3-day pass. So in Amsterdam, you get a 3-day pass, which is absolutely free, unlimited travel with all public transport. And you know, public transports are pretty amazing, right? So I used to board into those trams. They will give you a map inside the tram, so you know where you are going. And you could explore a city from a tram like nothing like that, right? Because in Amsterdam, they don't allow private transport. So you can't drive your car, or car don't go in many places, but tram goes in many places. So you can explore the city, and it is almost free because you don't have to pay anything, just swipe in, swipe out, done. So I have done those kind of traveling, and I love doing that wherever I go. So when I was in Delhi also, I used to do that. When I came to Bangalore, I'm doing it. There are many cities where they provide you those daily passes, right? So I buy them, I enjoy those unexplored places. During the weekend, because I love to use public transport, I don't own any vehicle, by the way, so I use public transport. I'm a public transport guy. So you find me mainly in the Church Street, where I go and explore books. So I heard many people love reading books. Frankly speaking, I don't get enough time to read books nowadays because of many reasons. But I love to collect books, thinking someday I will read, right? This is dangerous hobby, okay? You will accumulate like you will become a hoarder of books. So I started giving it away. The books which I have finished, or I have decided not to read, right, for some reason. So that I can clean some places. So we have a community of people where we exchange books, right? I started, and this kind of hobby is pretty dangerous in a sense, like you end up buying multiple versions of the same book. For example, I have got, I think, like 15 copies of different versions of Saranic verses, which was banned for some time. I kept on collecting those different editions and different versions. It's just, I finished it like once. I did not read all of them because I don't have to do the same story. But I have even the German copy, I have the German copy also, the French copy also. So that's the kind of hobby I think is now surviving for some time, because I've been reading books since my childhood. It's a family tradition, right? My grandmother had a big book rack which she gave it away to me, right? I'm proud owner still today. And that's how the tradition has been. So this is a little bit of me. I don't say technology is my hobby because that's my job, right? I can't really get rid of that. So I don't call technology as my hobby. I consider that's my work. Probably I will never do technology when I'm retired, right? Enough. But I'm here to talk about something which many of you have talked about, AI. But let me set the context here. I'm not an AI developer or builder, so I don't build those models. I don't come from that background. My background is to use those readily available models or AI to build an application. I'm a solution architect by profession. So my job is to find what tool fits where, and then can these existing models which is available in the market be beneficial in the overarching picture of the application. So I'm going to walk you through some of the things which I feel is easy to start. And my intent here is that you don't need to have a cloud subscription, or you don't need to buy anything. If you have a laptop and internet connection, you should be able to follow what I'm doing without having any subscription to anywhere. So let's not restrict yourself just because you do not have subscription to GCP or AWS or Azure on a personal basis. You'll not be able to use those AI models, right? There are free models available. There are places where it is already hosted and accessible. So you just need to register, get the endpoint, and build the application. And to build the application, you even don't need any source mindset where anybody can learn anything, right? Let's not restrict ourselves just because we do not have those licensed versions. These are all open source technologies. So that's what the intent is. So what I'm going to use today from a high level technology perspective are, because I have got a stable Azure subscription for myself, I will be running some of the things in Azure, but I will let you know like you don't need Azure and where you can go. So first of all, I'm going to use heavily GitHub. So GitHub is again free, so you can go and get an email ID and get a GitHub subscription created. Once you get a GitHub for free, you get something in GitHub called code spaces. So what is the code space here? Code space is a container-based development platform in the cloud. So you can eventually open the code space in browser. So imagine that you have a laptop which is a pretty old and you don't want to install anything, any runtime, anything, all that stuff. You can use the code space. So it's like a virtual machine in browser, right? You go inside and then do everything you want to do. It's a command-based, and then you get a Visual Studio Code, which is a GUI interface, right? That is free for you. For the free account, 60 hours, I think, in a month. Now, what is the solution? When it's exhausted, create another GitHub account. That's it, right? Forget, work. So there is no limit of yourself stopping just because you can't do anything, right? And once you do that, all the Python runtime and the libraries and everything you may need to build, you can deploy there. If you are a Python developer, if you are a JavaScript developer, you can do that in JavaScript also. It doesn't restrict you to use any specific language or runtime. So that's what I'm going to use today and show you how you can leverage that. GitHub also gives you few free models, right? And then what you can do, you can just, in the same GitHub account, you can get those model endpoint and start writing code. And in fact, it comes with the sample code. You don't have to break your head to explore how you want to enable those models for your application. So they give you a piece of code which you can copy paste and run in the GitHub. And I'm going to show you how you can do that, right? So that you can play around with those models. That's a basic understanding of how you can get some LLM model and bring it into your application and then start interacting with the model. Now, this is not what in real scenario we use the model with, because all the demo which I'm going to show you will use model's own memory, all the data it has got trained. But ideally, essentially, you need your data to interact with the model. So we'll go a bit into that just to give you an idea, but we'll not be able to explore that in this limited time frame. That probably is a dedicated session on retrieval augmented generation, but I will give you an idea how you can bring your data, make it relevant for the model, and say the model, you only give me answer out of data, don't involve your memory. Think of it like yourself when you got trained in the high school in maths, right? You have learned how to implement certain formulas, and you solved a couple of problems, and you went to an exam hall, and you find a different problem which you never solved. How do you solve that? That's how our model solves this problem, right? So it doesn't always need to bring that from memory, but the training is important here, right? How we get trained ourselves in mathematics, right? And then solve some unknown problem which we know can fit with some formula and then try and then get that right answer most of the time, right? So this is exactly what model does. Now let me show you a quick demo, and everything I'm going to write is available in a public repository. So I'm going to flash it out first so that you know where to look for the detail. I don't have a slide here, but I do have a little. So let me put this URL in front of you. So if I may. So this is the URL. You will get everything. So what I have done is that I have created a video, posted in YouTube, building that end to end. So you don't have to, let's say, remember from this today's session. You can go back and revisit that video and then do that. All the source code I have used in the video are all available here. So you can pretty much copy paste and run the way I run. You can change if you want to change, but they're all written in Python. So if you don't come from Python background, you'll probably figure it out in different languages like JavaScript or .NET. There are libraries available, but the approach will be the same, because if you see the GitHub, they will give you those options. Now let me take you back to the GitHub page where you can get the free model, because that is important. So I'll say that. I'll say GitHub models. If you search with this in any search engine, you get a GitHub model repository. It's a marketplace at the end of the day in GitHub, where you get the models in the GitHub available. Now, if you see in the list, right, if I go to the model listing page, let me sign in. Sorry about that. Okay, so once you log into this GitHub, right, you select a model. Now you can see that list of models available here, bunch of them. So this is basically a SaaS-based model. So all the infrastructure and all everything, right? You know, typically these are large language models. They need GPU-based machine. You can even get them downloaded. If you have a GPU-based machine, any gaming machine will work, and then you can install it there. You can work from that, but you need a very big hardware. Here, the hardware is provided to you, so you just get the endpoint. So you can see that there are multiple options available, and bunch of them. And don't get confused, because let's say if you want to use the DeepSeek R1, which was one of the most popular one a few months back, it comes with some code sample also. That's the best part of it. Now if you see that I am a Python developer, let's assume myself as a Python developer, I want to know how to write Python code, you get the Python code. So it's a good starting point, apart from you getting the model endpoint for free. Zoom. Yeah. So you can see that you have got few things readily available for you to start with, right? What are the libraries you need? Even it says the pip install, right? What library you need to install. It will also tell you like Azure AI Inference. Now, just to mention here, the Azure AI Inference is a generic library meant for these kind of repositories where you get multiple different kind of models from different providers. However, each provider comes with their own SDKs. For example, if you use the OpenAI model, OpenAI has their own OpenAI SDK. You can even use the OpenAI SDK. The code will look different, right? It's a difference between two SDK. This is a sort of like a generic interface. You can see that it's like inference, the name it. It's sort of like an interface where you can connect different models using similar structure. So at the end of the day, if you want to switch between models, you change from Llama to DeepSeek to OpenAI, you just change the endpoint and the key. That's all. Everything else remains the same. That's the benefit of using some common library. But you are free to use the native SDK if you want to use the OpenAI SDK. Okay? So this is the good starting point. Actually, you can actually get a model and then test it and then run the code absolutely for no cost. Right? The cost is the time and the laptop you're using. But there is no cost you need to provide to any of the providers who are providing these services. So that's the beauty of it, right? Let me quickly walk you through what I'm going to show you today. Now, I have got a GitHub repository which I created. Let me open that. And let me open this. So it is a very simple GitHub repository which has got a sample app. So let me increase the size a bit. Is it visible clearly, the back? Let me know if it is not visible. So So if you go to the sample app, this is where the code is already written, and I'm going to walk you through that code quickly. I've got 33 minutes, so I need to go fast. So what I downloaded that code into my local machine so that I get a little. So is the black background okay, or do I need to change it to white background? It's fine, right? I can increase the font size. Okay. So if I may open that in the Visual Studio Code. Okay, let me show you that. Now this is the Visual Studio Code running from my local machine. Okay, and I need a couple of libraries, if you may see here. Let me increase this size. So one is that I need the Azure AI Inference, and then dot environment. Dot environment is to read the key value pair from a text file and then dump it into the environment variable. That's a Python ability. You can hard code it, you don't need dot environment in that case. But I'm just using that so that I don't expose my key and the endpoint in the public repository, right? That's the whole intent. But you can hard code it, you don't need dot environment, don't go very complex. So what essentially you need in the same folder, you need a file called .env. So an example of this would look like this. So the name of the key and the value of the key, right? So it's a name value pair. You provide that file, it loads them into the environment as environment variable within the Linux or Windows scenario, and then you can read from the environment variable, right? That's a typical container approach. I've got a real dot environment which I'm not going to open here because then that will expose the code. So I'll just close it and I open this. So what I'm using here is a very commonly used called Jupyter Notebook. For Python test, you can use Jupyter Notebook and run small code blocks. You don't have to build the whole application, and the memory contains the previous steps. So if you declare a variable, it can be used later. So you can do different hit and try data science or uses that. If I leverage that to explain the code, it helps me. Okay, but it's not how to run the application. So I'll show you how you package the application and how to build the application at the end of the day. That's the whole intent. So these are the libraries I need. I am using a chat completion. That means I type something, it adds the text to it, and then gives me the output, right? So yeah, I'm going to use that kind of thing. And then I need a couple of Azure credential. That means like key to connect to Azure, so don't worry about it. And then the environment to dot environment. So let me execute this also. Let me also execute in case it is not done. It should be done. So clear the output so that it becomes clean. So now a second step is also done. And then I'm going to read this deployment endpoint, deployment model name, and deployment token. So these are the values you will get from GitHub. So that basically if you go and enable the GitHub, you will get an endpoint. You will be asked to create a personalized token in GitHub. So it's a developer setting. Just search how to create that. You will get an instruction. Even in fact, they also give you the instruction on the same page. Create a GitHub token. Use that token because that's how you will be able to interact with the GitHub. And then the model name. If you are using a specific model, you have to give that model name. So you can see that DeepSeek has got 3-4 variations. So you have to be very specific about which model you are using. And if you're using one model for different purpose, you basically identify them with the model name, right? So you can say that model for production, model for dev, model for UAT, so like that, but behind the scene that could be same model. So you basically define using model name. And then I'm going to print the endpoint just to check if it is connecting correctly. So it's connecting correctly, so it's basically getting me the endpoint. That means they're reading the file properly. That's a test I've done. The next thing is that I enable a client, just like when you connect to a database, right? You have a client to connect, right? And then after that you send the query and fetch the output. So the same way, I build a connect, and the connect is a chat completion connect. So it's a SDK based class. You can see that I'm providing the endpoint and the key to this client to enable and initiate the client object. And this is what I'm going to use in my next step. So the client is initiated. Once the client is initiated, I'm going to run a very basic prompt. What is the capital of Karnataka? And you notice the experience here. The moment I hit here, it will be blank for some time. Because this I'm using behind the scene is a DeepSeek R1 model, which is the reinforcement model, which means that it comes with some conclusion and it analyzes and comes with further conclusion. So it rates in its own responses and comes with that thing. It's just like a human being, right? So if you say, let's say I live in BTM, if you ask me, how can I reach BTM? I'll give you a step-by-step instruction. So you go outside, take a BMTC bus, get down on Silk Road if it is coming on Silk Road and cross that. I give you this step-by-step instruction. It also does that. Exactly same way. And I'm going to show you how the response looks like. Okay? So it takes some time, right? You see that there is no response coming in. Now this is not a great experience from an application perspective. You know, like we are the frequent-minded users, right? We don't like application which is not getting me a response immediately. So this is not a great experience, but it works. So you can see that it starts thinking like, okay, find the capital of Karnataka, let me start recalling, know about it, and then does all these things, and it finds that Bengaluru is the output, so it's fine. But it's a small answer, right? It doesn't need to think too much. However, you can change this experience by using the stream output, which means that as and when the thinking process is happening, you keep giving the output. But do not wait for the full result to come. So how that experience looks like is also something you can control from the SDK. So if you look into the bottom part of the code, where I say that give me the 5 good reasons why I should exercise every day. Okay? So it will start doing some thinking and it will start expressing you as and when it happens, and the output will also come. So if you see that I did not print it out directly, I rather printed the choices here, and this is also coming from the sample. So it's not something I have invented. So you just notice here that it shows the result as and when it comes. So you can see that it is nothing. So you don't have to wait for the whole thing to complete. So if it is a very complicated ask, you can see that the result as the thinking process is ending, so think is ending, and then the final output is going to be given here as the 5 values, right? 1, 2, 4, 5, right? It's truncated, yes.
Let's say I want the output in a certain format. Okay, let's say I want for all the states of India, I want the name of the capital city. So I wanted something like a key value pair, let's say. Is it possible to do that?
Yes. So this is possible to do that through prompt. So there is a way to write that in a prompt. So you say that I want all the state in India. This is what you will be writing, and their capital.
Prompt is fine. But if I want it in a proper data structure where I can store it programmatically, prompt I mean pretty much it's possible. You do in ChatGPT, right? But
Yes.
if I want to, let's say, store it in a key value pair, I gave a very simple example of, let's say, key value pair in a JSON structure. Maybe let's say I want it in a key as well as the value will be an array, let's say. I want it in a proper format programmatically, okay, so that I can take that, assign it to a variable in my target programming language. It can be Node.js, it can be Java, C#, whatever, and let's say store it in a DB or show it in a UI or whatever. So
You can do that. In the prompt, you say that the example output will look like the format. If you want a JSON format, give the example of JSON. Say that the state capital or the India and their state capitals in an array, you give an example of the format as the output would look like, and that will give you that output.
actually, I tried this. I mean, many models in Hugging Face. I mean, there is this model called Mistral.
Mistral, yes.
I mean, they always mess it up. What else? I mean, like, I wanted a proper format. It can be anything. Okay. It always messes it up. I mean, like.
But this can be done. We have done it, right? We have actually taken the output from the model and then directly imported in our data source by giving the CSV format as our output format, and it gives me a CSV format output.
Okay, I'll see.
Yeah. So you can do that.
And it all depends upon the prompt, that how you are actually giving it to the system, right? If you are not giving a proper example,
yes,
the output can be, as you said, can be messed up.
I have given proper example. What it does is it sometimes adds its own creativity to it, which I don't want it to. So,
no, as I said, like that, prompt is not a science, it's an art, right? You will not find one single answer to every problem. But you have to try different way, right? It's like a singing, right? How you improvise your learning, and then you build something by yourself, and that's why those great classical singers are different from us, right? They also know what we know, but it's differently they present. So the prompt is also that way. So it's an art how you build that prompt, and there is a few shot learning and one shot, right? So if you build a large prompt saying that you give me this step by step, and this output will look like exactly this way, it might not work in the first hit. Then you have to try differently, right? Keep trying so that output, because at the end of the day, this is a black box. The models are black box. You can't really control the output unless you control it from your application, right? So either we have done that because we have done this prompt and then get the output in CSV and use the data flow to push it in your data source. We have done that and it worked, right? So,
system prompt as well over here somewhere about it should be.
Sorry?
We are asking the example of capital of Karnataka. It's giving me, but do we also specify somewhere in that system prompt that we give me a short answer, give me
you can do that. You can do that. In fact, I think I have got an example here. So if you see here, I'm not right. At the bottom, you see here multi-turn conversion. You can specify what is that prompt would look like, right? So what is the capital of France? The assistant message, the capital of France is Paris. The usage message. So you can define those prompts, what those prompts would look like, right? You can even say that, be nice and gentle when you're responding, right? And be like an assistant, right? So that you look or seem like helpful, not very harsh when you are responding from a model.
But it goes in one message only.
So you have to. So there are multiple ways to do that. So what I have used is the AI inference SDK, but there is a LangChain also available where you can define a prompt template and say what kind of thing are there and what are the variable part in the prompt template. Let's say you ask for order ID, but you get specific information from the order ID. That is a fixed thing. But the order ID will change for every interaction. So that is the variable part. So you can define a prompt template in LangChain. There is something called similar called semantic kernel. So these are all like orchestration tools for building AI-based application where the SDKs are provided to you differently. So this is one way, right? This is not the only way, but depending on what you are using, you will probably change the behavior, change the way of writing code. Okay, so this is what the application looks like. Now I'm going to use this as something which for my business user who are not an expert, doesn't have a Visual Studio Code, doesn't know how to run Python or Jupyter Notebook. So this is the proof of concept I have built for my business users so that I can get some money to build the real application. So if that is the intent, now I need to package it. I need to build it some easy interface, maybe a browser-based or mobile-based application. So let's see how that application look like. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to just create a new file called temp.py, and I'm going to show you what I'm planning to use here. So, all right. So what I'm going to use is a library to quickly build a prototype. Okay. Import. Streamlit is not there, so let me install it. So I'm going to use a library called Streamlit. So I installed it. Either you can install it in the code space or you can install it in a local machine. So I'm using my Windows subsystem for Linux. So that's where I'm installing. And once it is installed, I should be able to use the Streamlit. Now once the Streamlit is getting installed, let me write them. So I'll say title. Okay, let's use some of the GitHub Copilot feature. So what you saw that it's giving me the option is that coming from GitHub Copilot. So you see that it's just having a title and something, and then it is also installed. So let me try to run this, if I may run. I'll say cd sample app. and then I say stream lit run temp.py. Okay, if I run this, it opens, just does a port mapping and opens in the browser. So pretty quickly, it can build a very good looking, professional looking UI, right? And you can see that. Okay, let me see.
You didn't save the file. How did it still open?
I didn't save it. It runs the Streamlit. Just a moment. I didn't save the file. That's a good point. It should be auto-saved actually, so let me see. So that's a good point. So let me run it again. So this is how the page looks like, right? You can bring in the text box, tape, buttons, and you want to do a good, let's say HTML or UI designing, but you can come up with that. Using this, I'm going to extract the code from the Jupyter notebook and build this page. Let me show you step by step how I have done that.
Server you configure or that comes in?
No, it comes in built. So that run is an exe at the end of the day. So the Streamlit run, if you install it in Windows, you'll find the run as an exe, which basically does this little bit of web server activity and then host it in a port mapping way. So it uses port 8501. Okay, 8501 by default. You can change that to 8502 or something like that. Okay, so let me just stop this and then show you two files. So what I've done here is that I have extracted the code from the Jupyter notebook, exactly the same code. So if you see here, the same steps which I have taken, like I just copied them all, right? And I made a function called create client so that I can call it and returns a client. I can do it in all single line, that's also fine. I just wanted to make it a little meaningful. And then what I'm trying to do is that now I'm trying to pass the prompt as user input. Okay, this is the function, that's why I created the user input. So anything you put will come to this function and execute it as stream. So you can enable that as a stream output by saying stream equal to true, right? So then the output will come and then appear. That's the core part of the thing, 33 lines only of what you have seen in the Jupyter notebook, exactly the same replica, there is no change, okay? When I go back to the web part of it, there's a little tweak I did because I need to show this, and all these codes are available, by the way, in the repo I shared, so you will find them all there. Now there are a couple of things I added just to forget it, and then I enable the client. So I use this same file to create a client, called the create client function. So client is created, and then I enter the prompt in a text box. Basically text area is there, so I enter the prompt. It comes as a query, and then I basically call this function get response. Pass the client, send the query, and print them as a string. So it's a web experience. So I have to print them as and when it comes. So it is different than Jupyter notebook. So you see little difference here. So now this DeepSeek web.py file is the file which I can run as a Streamlit application. So let me run that. So I say Streamlit run. You can see that. Just to quickly test, I can say hi. And then if it is connecting, if everything is fine, it will give me a response. If there is an error, it will show you an error. Let me increase the font size a little bit more. Now let me put a little complicated or step-by-step sort of thing. How can I add an existing source code folder to a GitHub repository. Is a question a junior developer generally has to send developer. Okay? And imagine that you are one of the senior developers answering it. So you see here, it will have a human-like conversation. Okay, it's a DeepSeek R1 model. So it's a human-like conversation, and it will tell you different choices and options with the possible error which you might encounter and the troubleshooting guide in case you get those errors. And let me tell you, this is damn good in answering this way. You can literally take it and write a blog, and it becomes like the solution to everybody, right? You see here, it will come with the formatting also. This is a thinking going on right now, so the thinking is not yet done. Now it is having a step-by-step. This is well formatted step-by-step. Now you can see that it is starting with a GitHub. So you go to the GitHub and create a new repository. And it says that initialize the local path. And then it says that you do a stage commit, that means local commit, before you push it, right? And how do you link it to that repository which you have created in GitHub? And then you can rename the branch. Exactly, you do the same thing. I'm telling you, like if you have done this before, you know exactly the same thing. And it comes with the troubleshooting. And let me tell you, this is also the reason, right? You might get a troubleshooting error if you already have a repo created in the GitHub and you did not clone it locally, but you're trying to push the code which is not there in that repo. There is a conflict always, and how do you resolve it? And I remember some time back it also gave me a workaround which I generally use, which means that I copy paste the whole content in the cloned folder. Right? It becomes easier because then there is no conflict, right? It assumes there's a new file and it pushes, right? So that also is an option once they have given, right? But right now I don't see it. Now this is an amazing way of, like, say, interacting with AI. Now you imagine that you are trying to provide them solution to a problem. It not only gives you the solution, it also tells you the rationale behind it, right? The reason behind it is coming with the solution. You can see the step-by-step instruction or thinking process. It is like you're talking to a fellow developer or fellow senior developer who you think is a mentor, and ask this, and he or she will tell you exactly what you will encounter from their experience, right? Now, this is not the experience with every model. So depending on which model you are going to use, you might find different output format, but eventually this is how you interact with that. Now this is still running locally. This is still running from my dev box where I'm developing, and this is not accessible to my, let's say, business stakeholder. Yes.
So one question regarding Streamlit. So this Streamlit is only for the prototyping, or it can be used for production as well?
So I mostly have seen for prototyping, because in a real production you will use the actual UI technologies, right? Angular or React, depending on whatever standard that is. But this is good for prototyping. I have not seen using it in the production. Yeah. I use it because I'm not a UI developer, so it makes my life easier to build something pretty quickly, and then I can show it to impress people. So, and let me show you how we can package it, right? And then create it as an application. Now to package it, you have different options and choices. So I'll take an option of building a container image. So if you go to the streamlit.io portal, that's their official documentation site, you'll find a sample Docker file. I took that sample Docker file from there and put it in my source code. Again, no invention. So you go to that Streamlit and get that sample documentation. So let me show you how that Docker page would look like. Let me stop it. Docker file, open, and remove this. So this is only, I think, 7 lines of code are written, step-by-step instruction. So it's like a built instruction for use. I use the Python 3.9 Slim as a base image, right? and then I decide the what folder as app. You can say app on or my app, anything of that sort. I copy the content from the root to that app folder. That's the instruction number 5, line number 5. And then I update the pip because this was complaining about the pip upgrade, so I did that in the Docker file. And then I install all the 3 libraries I need apart from the Python, the default Python version which comes. So I need .environment for my file and then environment variable thing, Streamlit to run this application, and then Azure AI Inference. If you're using OpenAI SDK, you'll probably use OpenAI as the library. So depending on which library you're using, you are going to use it. Ideally, you should also update the base image with the apt-get, right? So it's basically, you should be doing that so that you are not vulnerable. And then I use the port 8501. That's the default Streamlit port when you see the portal, right? And then what I'm going to do is that I give a command. So in every container image, it's a single process thing, right? So I run that single process as Streamlit run the file name. That's exactly I was doing in my dev box. I do the same thing, but I put some additional information that use this port and the server address is 000, I think, something like that is. So these are all optional parameters you can also provide when you try that out. So this is the container image I'm gonna get if I am gonna create this. So let me build that container image. So I come to this here. I say cd sample up, and I say docker build, and I say arc neat -t, and I say v1, and I just run this to build that. So it will use the same Docker file, and dot means I'm using the default name called Docker file. Let me increase the font size. I'm using the default name Docker file, and then you can see that it is going to go step by step, and then right now it is it'll take some time. Okay, in the meantime I can take questions. Any questions? Yeah.
So let's assume that your prompt has an input file to get created for me to download. Let's say you said right, like what is the steps to create a folder in GitHub. So it gave you a detailed answer. So I want the model to put it in a downloadable file for me and provide a link. So where that file actually goes and basically renders whether it's on a disk or can we configure that?
So that is not a default model feature. It is your application behavior. So when you build an application, to give an option for the end user to download you as a file. So if you use Gemini, you have seen that you can copy. There's a nice little icon comes, you can copy. If you get a CSV output, you can download the file. That's not the Gemini feature. It is the application they have built using Gemini, right? So what essentially you need is you use that output and build that by yourself. Now, if you talk about the memory, model doesn't have a memory for the application. So model has its own memory which is stored and which is a read-only. You can't alter that. You can only use it. So if you have to retain some of the historical conversation to continue the context of the conversation, let's say you asked what is your order ID, you will not be asking that same question again and again in the same session. You need some memory. That memory is in the orchestrator's memory. So if you use LangChain, if you use semantic kernel, they come with caching. So you use their caching to cache those things and hold those contextual data. This is an application feature. This is not a model's behavior. So right now I'm using raw model. I'm not using any orchestrator at this point. But if I use LangChain, I get those capability. Like I can keep some memory and I can just relate my prompt with the previously discussed memory and then make it more relevant for the end user. Yeah.
No, I think, so let's say, forget about that previous discussion. This is my first question, and that's what I need from the model. Okay, I understand when you say that model doesn't create a file for you. Your application does, and you need to configure it. Now, where that configuration fits in, as an like how do we basically get the model to get that output, and how do we consume it from the model?
Just like how I'm displaying that in the area website, right? So I get the output from model, I take that as a variable and put it in the text area. You get a display, right? Like that.
Right.
You take it.
Who gets to decide what type of file I need to create?
It is you, the application developer.
So as a user, right? He can ask you anything, right? Like irrespective of JSON or Excel, or it may be a doc or PowerPoint. So how do you basically configure for an indefinite type of file formats, file extension?
So if you have a specific kind of application, not a generic one, you probably have a specific output, either PDF or a CSV or a JSON, right? You decide based on what prompt is asking you to do, and then you probably download that as a file, right? You dump that in those file extension, and then give them option to download it. It is applications behavior. It's nothing to do with model.
The same thing goes to the sharing of that, chat that we can.
Yes, yeah. It is purely an application play. Yeah. The question from back.
Hi, can I use it with Olama locally?
Sorry? Can you?
Locally, can I run LLM Olama and use the
Yeah, you can run. You can run locally.
And I heard about Chainlit. So Chainlit and Streamlit are similar. Do you know comparison? Okay.
Chainlit is
customized for this. So my last question, in Streamlit, can I use MCP protocol? Tools capability?
So Streamlit is a generic generic framework to display the data in a much easier manner. So imagine that you come from a statistics and mathematics background and you are a pure data scientist. You have no clue about HTML and web development. You can use Streamlit to dump your data in a presentable format. That's the whole intent of the Streamlit.
Because in Chainlit I have a MCP support, so this I'm asking. Streamlit also I have.
So see the MCP is a pretty new concept, right? There are scenarios where you can get MCP support by default. You can also have that in the contextual thing within the semantic kernel, which is a Microsoft, let's say SDK available for you to build application, right? So depending on the capability of those, you can bring them in, right? So it is not like one choice, but you have multiple options available.
For using this Azure AI inference SDK, do you really need to connect with Azure in the background? No connection.
No connection required. You can use the Azure AI Inference SDK to connect to an OpenAI subscription directly. No Azure. No Azure required.
Can we use this model as like a base model, and on top of it, can we train it on our own data? Say, let's say for our organization specific or something that personal or which could be discrete, and then can we host it in our virtual servers which we have, and then let the model do the job of answer with the knowledge of the base knowledge what it has. Can we train on top of it to utilize it for our own use?
Okay, there's a chocolate for you. Pass it on, please. I'll pass it on to you for questions. There's somebody from the back. You just pass it on. Yeah, I'll just answer his question and then I will. So the model, there are a couple of things. One is fine-tuning, one is retraining, right? Retraining is where you take a base model, you bring your data and you train it with a huge infrastructure. So it is like to kill a mosquito, you are bringing a bazooka, right? You don't do that in a generative AI world. What do? You use the generative AI and you say that your temperature is 0. So there is a feature in SDK which says that don't be innovative. If you do not find it in my data, don't give answer. Okay, that's what we can tune it. in the SDK, you can say that. And we say that you get a prompt from end user, like what is the capital of Karnataka. And you have a list of state of India and their capital in an Excel file maybe, where the Karnataka is missing. The LLM will not give you an answer because you say that prompt, you refer your question here and then get the chunk and then pass it as an input. So there is a hop in between. So your data sits here, the model sits here, user enters prompt from here. So the prompt doesn't hit the LLM. It hits your data, generates the chunk of data which it finds relevant, and then it passes as a new prompt. That is how we use as a concept called retrieval augmented generation, where your model remains read-only, untrained with your data, but they are relevant with your data when somebody asks question. Now this data will keep changing, right, every now and then, because it's transactional data maybe. So you will not be training every time, right? You will be using the data as a boundary to get an answer. If there is nothing, you don't answer. You say, sorry, I couldn't find anything. That's fine, right? So this is how we generally use the model with our own data. This is one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is called fine-tuning. Fine-tuning is making the model relevant for a specific industry, let's say. If it's the healthcare industry, you say that fine-tune is as per the healthcare industry standard. So you have different instruction compliance. And that way, your model response looks like somebody professional from the healthcare industry is responding. You're not going to train them with only healthcare data. That is not economically beneficial. It's a hugely costly. These are all like terabytes and petabytes of data they have. When you retrain, it becomes very, some researchers do that, but it's not practical because you have to keep doing it to make it relevant.
When do you go with semantic kernel or Pruve, irrespective of the language?
So depending on the capability, it's a runtime at the end of the day.
Yeah, so how is it like so much different? So Pruve is so popular and semantic kernel is also getting popular.
So it is a skill set. What is the current skill set? How long it will take for your team to adopt something completely new? Depending on that, you will take a call.
With respect to the, like let's say I'm building some ETL pipeline with some intelligent Q&A at end of the day. So whether you should choose Pruve or semantic kernel, what is the decision factor? So if
as I said, like it's like .NET, Java, Python.
No, like ignore like they knows every language. So, or they doesn't know any language. Let's say.
So you will probably do a small proof of concept to try out the capability to see what fits well in your organization, because that's something, a decision you will make through proof of concept.
Okay. We are taking it like what? Like maybe
capability, right? So if something is not doable, you will not take that. So that's how you will basically choose, based on whether you can perform that using the tool or not. Yes.
What are the best practices in terms of doing guardrail design? Guardrailing is something you can say, okay, put a proper prompt or proper things within the biggest company. As a company, keep asking many things which is not necessary for a company. So in order to do that, there might be some best practices which...
See, there are two things. One is that model has got a moderation built into it, right? And then apart from that, you can add additional capability like content filtration from an outside perspective, not inside the model. So when somebody asking question, tell me a step by step, how can I do a fatal suicide right for myself? You will stop it. You will not even send it to the model. So that is where the content moderation will kick in, which is a separate service altogether. It's not inside the model. And it will find that if there is a derogatory or this thing is there, something racial, and then all these things are there, you will not send it to the prompt. You will cut it off. Similarly, if even model comes up with some answer which that content moderation figures out is not something which is supposed to be answering, let's say somebody is answering about their compete in a bad manner, you will stop it. So that moderation is a separate service altogether.
Yeah, actually what I have done is I have created a file which says, okay, I want to know about a step by step, understanding how to make a bomb, for example. It's not a right thing to ask.
Yes.
So I made a file and a reference to that, and when I'm hitting to, for example, Olama I'm using it. Lama 3.
Yeah.
When I'm using it, I'm going through those files.
Yes.
Is there any other way which we have to do?
So this is for
way
the
which I'm
open source
doing.
model.
Yeah.
But if you use like cloud thing, like Azure, we have something called a content moderation service. So you can go and create a service. And you say that whatever prompt is coming, pass it through the content moderation. It will take care because it is updated, right? It's like an antivirus as a SaaS. So it will take care of all the thing. And if you want to add additional thing, let's say you are talking about the healthcare, right? You can add additional content moderation by bringing those files you're talking about, right? Because you can also do that on top of what you get by default. You can bring those things also.
Understood.
So I think I'm running out of time, is it? So I'm running out of time, but I just want to quickly show you what I have done with that thing very quickly, okay? So I'll say that I have got images. So I'm not going to show you step by step. In fact, the portal has got step by step. So the model, the model I'm using, right, ArcMate V1, the container image is created 12 minutes ago. So it's fine. Now what are the additional steps? You can run it locally. So Docker allows you to run it locally. It will give you the same local experience. You can test it once it is okay, running fine. You can then push it to a Docker Hub, which is also free. As I promised you that I'll talk about the free. And I'm not going to show you the step because they are already there. So you just need to log in and then push it as a Docker Hub and then host it anywhere. So I have, for the demo, I have hosted it in container apps. So let me quickly show you if I have that container app running somewhere. One minute. It's just reloading. Huh? Sorry? No, I'm using Docker Community Edition, like desktop version. It's a free one. So you can also install it locally and then build a Docker image basically. To build a Docker image, you don't need to install everything if you are using CodeSpace. By the way, CodeSpace comes with all these tools. Huh? So let me quickly show you that. So this is using the same Docker image which I built today morning and then push it to the Docker Hub for testing purpose. And I will see that it is the same interface with the same text but coming from a Docker file which is pushed as a public repository and then hosted as a public website. Now this is the URL which my end user will open and test it, right? So that's the whole intent. So it's probably taking time to load because it was sleeping. I can take question, one or two questions.
So this container is free.
So we want to track LLM bad response.
Sorry?
LLM bad response.
Yeah.
So how can I integrate? So we have a clean LLMs. Suppose every response is not correct. I need to measure the accuracy. Suppose if I give a prompt like to display the third month of the year alphabetically, some LLMs give still March. That is not correct. Alphabetically. Correct, right? But I wanted to measure that accuracy based on the different LLMs. So I wanted, it should be automatically I need to capture the LLM response, bad LLM response.
Yes. So there is a testing model. I don't know about the other LLM models or generic testing model, but in Azure there is something called Azure AI Foundry, where you can bring in multiple different LLM models, give a same prompt and see what the response looks like and what the ideal response will be, like a unit test. You can test it and rate the LLM model and then decide what model will be fit for you, right? So that testing you can do before you decide, right, what is the right fit for your application, like unit test. You give this prompt, you should get this kind of response. If you don't get this response, you lower the ranking, and then you have like 5-6 LLM model you have decided high level. You decide like what is the perfect one, and you can have multiple use cases. And there is a tool, it's a tool at the end of the day where you can do that. but there must be some open source option available to try out these things.
There are actually benchmark.
In your code, you have like each prompt, is it stateless? What I meant is
Everything is stateless from a model perspective because model doesn't alter its memory.
no, at least in the code, is the object is it stateful? I mean, in the next question when I make on the same object, does it retain the previous question?
It doesn't retain unless you explicitly retain it. So it's an application behavior where you need to say that, retain the previous response and question, and then relate it to that. So this is how you write application. But if you keep asking question, it will have no clue about the previous question by default. So I'll pass this chocolate to you for the question. Yeah.
I have one question.
Can I take one more question? One last question. Otherwise I'll be blacklisted.
So say for example, we have the source data and we have
Please.
You pass it.
Hello. Yeah. So we have the source data and from there model is getting the data based on that. Say for example, you take an example that how to create a nuclear probe. There will be an intermediate model which will not allow the question to go to the model and it will stop. But if I ask that, hey, spell it out nuclear probe, then it is not a something vulnerable.
Yeah.
That should be allowed. So what is the intermediate model which is performing this kind of operation?
So this is called moderation, right? So it's built into the model. It's part of responsible AI capability. So when the model provider, the people like company like Facebook, Microsoft, Google, they provide these models, right? They build that inside the model to analyze the intent of the question. When you're asking for a spelling, right? It is not a harmful question. Though those words are maybe alarming word, but they're not harmful question. So it might give you the answer. But the moment you ask this within the same word, the intent is different that how to build, it will stop. Because this is how the built-in intelligence kicks in inside the model.
Can you please name some model which does this intermediate job?
So OpenAI, all the OpenAI model, the DeepSeek model, you try them, it will not work. So you try with the raw model, not with the application they have built, because they have already put additional thing. But what we show as a demo is the raw model we are using, right? There is no anything which they have provided. It's all inside model. You can try with those models. In fact, the GitHub I showed you, right? There is a chat playground. You don't have to even build an application. You can use the playground to ask those questions. You'll use the raw model to give you the answer. So you can test it out by yourself, whether it's, but it is not foolproof, right? Always like don't blindly trust on the model. You always have to come something with your own to restrict, because they are predictive models, right? So it's not deterministic.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much.